go to tier 3, because they're already injecting this material before they frack. You're already saturated. And the chemical waste from the coal and the chemical waste, not the chemical waste, but the content from the coal, the heavy metals, it's very similar to what's in natural gas. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And what concerns me is this is water that came from my friends in West Virginia that I worked with on heavy metal hair sample analysis to try and find out why they were getting so sick. And this was from the class 5 wells that you were talking about. The first jar that I had, it ate the metal lid off of the jar and it fell into it and it dissolved. And people were washing their babies in this water, okay? That didn't even have the chemicals in it that we're talking about with fracking. And that I would argue. Because when I went down to the West Virginia DEP's office to look at their records, there are class 2 injection wells intermixed all over the place with these class 5s. Each well that you have is a potential path for migration. So I don't know that this doesn't have fracking waste in it. I honestly don't. I don't. But I know that my friends were getting really sick. And with the heavy metal hair sample analysis that we went around and did to try and push for a human health study, my doctor that I was working with, who has worked with the CDC before, took one look at the results and said, you will have no problem pushing for a human health study with this. Incidentally, the company that was responsible for this ended up settling out of court. They never went to court over this. I would also say it's a myth that these records are public. If you want to find out about permits that are pending in your community, that is the very first step of trying to participate as a citizen in that permitting process. If you don't have the documents, you have no idea what they're proposing, and you can't begin to look at impacts. And I'll tell you what I found. And I know this process from working on coal. Okay, I'm not going into this cold. We worked through a lot. Terry's going to attest. We worked through a lot of permits with the coal-fired power plants. And I'm not claiming I know everything, but I know my way through this process. What I found is that it took, with the very first try, 3 times the amount of the public comment period to actually get your hands on the documents to look at it. The comment period is 15 days from the time that they put a tiny little public notice in the back of your newspaper, and it took 45 to get the documents to be able to comment. By the time I got my appointment with the ODNR to get copies of this, because they were saying it would be too burdensome to copy it, incidentally it was 26 pages, the person I made the appointment with is the person who issues the permits, and he made my appointment 3 days after this expired. And I have emails this thick telling him why I wanted those documents, why it was important, that I knew the clock was ticking. I wanted to know when this was public noticed, because I knew that this was by my drinking water supply that had already been poisoned once by unregulated, undisclosed chemicals, and I was not willing to put my community through that again. 3 days after the public comment period expired, he gave it to me. Why is that important? Right now, there are 27 injection well permits for new injection wells pending in this state. They were put on hold because of the earthquakes in Youngtown that were induced by the volume of waste that was being injected. You also had earthquakes down here. It wasn't taken into account in that Youngstown report, and when I asked them why, they said, well, because there was no data. There was no data because there were no monitors. It wasn't that you didn't have earthquakes here, and I can tell you, you are getting record amounts of waste from what I have seen in the records sitting in Columbus. Just across the Washington County line in Noble County with Triad, those wells are getting 600,000 barrels a year apiece. And those are voluntarily reported numbers. There is no monitoring. There's no monitoring in the truck when it goes into the truck. There's no monitoring at the well when they dump this stuff in the well. And what I found when I started adding up what people were seeing visually coming into our community, and what was on the hauling records, and what was on the well operators' records, were not matching. And when I confronted the ODNR about this, they told me that they were going to not give me the records until they returned them so I could finish my records request to look at the rest. There's 7 file cabinets full sitting up there in Columbus. Until they returned them to industry for corrections. I said, what kind of corrections can you possibly return these for? There is no data. There are no numbers that you can go back and check this by. All you have is the industry's word, and they're not matching up. And they said, well, there might be mathematical errors. And so by the time we volleyed these things back and forth, I finally got my hands on them. And they still don't match what we see coming into our communities. 5 minutes? Okay, I'm going to try and talk fast. What I had hoped to bring you guys tonight were copies of all 27 of those permit applications so that you could see at least the 2 that are pending here in Newport Township and It's Newport and Newport. We've got 2 Newports. I asked for these records April 27th. There's a 15-day comment period. We were told 2 weeks ago that these things would be issued in 2 weeks. They have told me that they're not going to release them until they go through their legal department. I have nothing to share with you. I'm sorry. We can't get the basic information that we need. Now, if they're regulating this so well, and there is no problem, why are they so darn reluctant and so slow to release these records so that we are denied our basic rights to participate? It's important that we participate because they have different rules for people in urban communities versus rural communities. If you live in a rural community, they are not required to look at risks that are unique to your community, say an abandoned coal mine that they might drill a rig over, or a high-hazard coal ash impoundment. The definition of a high-hazard coal ash impoundment is that if it breaks, it will kill people. We know that these make the ground shake. There is nothing in the rules that requires them to put a volume limit on these permits when it comes to the waste in the state of Ohio. There is no, and when I asked them about this at the ODNR, do you know what Mr. Tomostik's assistant said to me? She said to me that these companies have insurance, and if they cause a problem, they will pay for it. I was dumbfounded, absolutely dumbfounded. Because I would also question, if they're doing no mechanical integrity testing and they're inducing earthquakes, what is that doing to the integrity of the other wells that are in proximity to it? You've already had a series of earthquakes here. And so I would say it is critical that you find out, when was the last mechanical integrity test done? Was it done after these earthquakes happened? Is stuff leaking out? We have no idea what's going into the aquifers. We really don't. There are a couple of things that would be really important. Believe me, I could go on and on all night. 15 minutes won't even crack the shell. But there are a couple things here that I think that we should really look at. We're told that we have public records. I would argue that they're not in a meaningful way. We are told that we have public participation. I would say we are completely excluded. If you go to the Department of Natural Resources website and you compare what they have in their oil and gas law summary, and you compare it to the Ohio Revised Code and the Ohio Administrative Code, they have completely omitted public participation from their website. Isn't it interesting that they would not consider public participation to be important enough to include in their summary? I would also say that what you were saying about Class 5, only accepting non-hazardous waste, they will tell you the same thing about Class 2 wells. If you look at the individual components that are going into the waste, into this injection material, by any other standard, they would be considered hazardous waste. They are officially classified as hazardous waste. There are known carcinogens in this stuff. The only reason it's considered not in the state of West Virginia applies in Ohio, but it's in a very twisted fashion. One thing that I've heard recently is that they've been talking about using acid mine drainage in these, and I think that is a really dangerous idea, as opposed to fresh water. If you look at the effect that acidity has on the concrete and the rubber tubings with this, hydrogen sulfide, for instance, is a very strong reducing agent. I trained as a medical laboratory technician. I know at least what questions to ask or where to try and look for answers. The problem with injecting acidic material in there is that it's going to damage the integrity of the cement casings that are supposed to protect our drinking water aquifers over time. Forget about the ground shaking. I'm just talking about the chemical content at this point. Even though our state has never tested this, I did get results from the West Virginia DEP that in one sample showed a pH of 1.5, which is basically hydrochloric acid. Now, the ODNR knows this is important because if you go to their website, you're going to see that they have different rules for areas that they consider to be hydrogen sulfide, problematic for hydrogen sulfide. Because of that, because it is a strong reducing agent. First off, how did they determine where they have a hydrogen sulfide problem? Would it be because it is requiring monitors and maybe we don't have that here? Second off, if you put a well into an area that's not considered to be an area where hydrogen sulfide is problematic, and you inject things with a pH of 1.5, what difference does it make? Shouldn't they all be built to those same standards? I think so. If they're not going to test it, I think they should test it. But considering they've never tested it even once, we have no idea what's going down into these holes. They're telling us that they only inject during the hours of operation. We see these trucks coming in at night when the gates are supposed to be locked. Why is there no investigation being done? I have a lot more questions than what I have answers at this point, but I am looking, and as soon as I get my hands on those permits, you will have them. But at this point, I asked on April 27th, according to the Ohio Revised Code, they are supposed to respond in a reasonable amount of time. My last response that I have printed out in here is that it is still with their legal team and they will not release it until those records go through their legal team. If they can't release the records and they have posted public comment periods, they have no business doing this and saying we're not going to release them until they go through our because 15 days is absolutely nothing. It'll go like that when you're trying to look at this and try and find out what the geology is in your area, what's the hydrology like in your area, where are your drinking water supplies, what do you stand to lose? Keep in mind, in rural areas like the most of your county is, you get a $1 million bond. That's a couple of houses. You get a $1 million bond if there's a problem. And if you look at the insurance coverage on this stuff, it does not cover induced earthquakes. There are so many things that if you think you've got homeowners insurance, you better check into this, because that bond is not going to cover it. And your homeowner's insurance most likely isn't either. And our time is up, right? I'm sorry. So just a couple of things that are solution related, okay? I didn't say this to throw everybody into clinical depression. We have a comment period right now on the new injection well rules in the state of Ohio. And I'm going to send this to the people with COFIG. So please, do you guys have a sign-in sheet with email addresses that you can send out this information to?
Yes.
Can we pass one if you don't? Because it's really important that people be looking at their rules. There are loopholes big enough to drive a Halliburton truck through, and we have got to be paying attention. And the comment period is going to end on August 15th. They're going to have a public meeting in Columbus, Ohio. If you can't get there, you can still submit comments. It's really important that we look at these. They're very short, but there are references to the existing law, and you really have to dig into it and look. Aside from that, look at getting some wellhead protection plans in your city quickly. These things are pending, and they could move forward at any point. I have not even been able to get an answer about where these permits stand in terms of public notice. I can't even get that. I'm going to pass this on because my time is up, but I could keep you busy most of the night.
Speaker tonight is Teresa Mills. For over 20 years, Teresa has worked as a grassroots leader in environmental issues to assist communities to find their voice, analyze data, and develop a strategic plan to address local needs. She began by shutting down the Columbus incinerator that was polluting her neighborhood. This incinerator was later defined as the largest emitter of dioxin in the country. Teresa also founded Buckeye Environmental Network, a statewide grassroots focus group. Today she works with the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. This group assists communities who are facing environmental health risk. As an Ohio Children's Health organizer, Teresa is presently focusing on the danger of schools being built near toxic land and facilities and other environmental health threats to children. Teresa is also the administrator for the No Frack Ohio listserv website, and most recently has become the fracking coordinator for Buckeye Forest Council.
First, let me tell you just a little bit about the organization that I am employed by full-time, which is the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. It is a national environmental group that is led by Lois Gibbs, the infamous activist from Lubbock, New York, whose community was relocated because of toxic waste. I think what Elisa had to say this evening was important. And I think what the most important thing for you all to take out of it is, if you are concerned about what is going on in your community, do not depend on anyone else to have your back, because the agencies do not have your back. If you're concerned, go out and get the information yourself. The first slide is it's an older slide that I used to use. And it shows you everything except the class 6 wells, which is kind of a newer class of well. And you can see, I'm not really good at sitting behind a desk, so.
Do you want to come over here?
No, I'm usually moving around.
Oh, well, you can move around. That moves.
You can see the, does this thing move with it?
Yes, it's a long cord.
I need a light, but you can see here, this is your class 1 wells. This is hazardous and non-hazardous. We have 10 hazardous waste injection wells in the state of Ohio. 6 of them are private, which means industry. They are only for the industry to use themselves. We have 4 class 1 injection wells that are commercial wells, and they're in Sandusky, Ohio, in Clyde, Ohio, where we have 39 children with cancer. A big health study going on there now. Some wastewater treatment plants inject fluid into class 1 injection wells. That is considered non-hazardous. You can see here the different formations, the drinking water sources. Then we go to the class 2 wells. And this shows you, this is like your old grandfather's well, okay? It goes down not very far. Some of them are only 1,800, 2,000, 2,800 feet. This is enhanced recovery well. So they actually inject into these wells to force oil to go into this well to be taken up. So it's actually to increase production. Class 3 wells are your solution wells. It's kind of like making brine with brine. It's like your saltwater caverns, and they actually put sometimes just regular water in it, sometimes a solution. There was one in PPG in Barberton, Ohio, that they actually used to create brine, and it was used in potash. So they pull the fluid out of the well and inject it right back down in the same well. So where did we get, how did we get here today? I'm not going to read all of this, but I think that one of the most important things is they keep saying, the industry keeps saying that this is not hazardous waste. It is not hazardous waste only because it has been exempted by the US EPA. Now the reason the US EPA exempted it back in 1986, before all of these smaller oil producers were making the big bucks that they're going to be making today, here's why the agency said they would not regulate this as hazardous waste. The economic harm that would befall the oil and gas industry if additional regulatory controls were imposed. Now, we're not talking about your grandfather's well or your neighbor's well. We're talking about today's wells, with industry making money hand over fist. And that's industry making money. That is not you making money. If you have a well on your property, you might make some money if they actually decide to drill the well. If you have an injection well, you may make some money, but for the community, injection wells are not a moneymaker. They are a no-job industry. It would not benefit your community. It is detrimental to your community. You will have increased truck traffic. You have the potential of contaminating your drinking water, and you will make no money off of it. Whoever owns the well may make a little bit. The state may make a little bit. For every barrel of fracking waste or brine that is produced in Ohio, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources makes a nickel per barrel. A barrel is 42 gallons. For every out-of-state waste, for every barrel of out-of-state waste, they make a quarter. Okay? Then the well owner gets to keep 3% of that. Okay, so it's not a moneymaker. It is not a moneymaker whatsoever. And if you have an injection well on your property, your liability is going to be out of sight. This is kind of the same thing. I know you've heard us use the acronym RCRA tonight, and that stands for the Resource Recovery Conservation Act. And that was part of what my boss was responsible for, because in Love Canal there were thousands and thousands of barrels of toxic chemicals buried in a canal, and that they built a school on top of it, and her community on top of it. So, you know, my boss is known as the mother of Superfund, so we know quite a bit about this. But, okay. Ohio. Okay. By using the initial injection date, if you look on that sheet that Elisa passed around, you will see there's 168 operating wells, and that's based on the injection date. We have 29 wells that are permitted but not operating. We have 27 applications received, but the permits have not been issued. So I think it's a total of like 197, and then add 27 on top more of that.
Actually, some of those were permitted, were not. And that's one of the questions, as far as the status. What's happening with the ones that were already permitted?
Okay, and you might see on that list that how many barrels a day they can inject. Okay, but it's not really barrels a day. It's barrels a day on average, of a year average. So you can see 200 barrels a day, and that's just for your smaller grandfather's well. 365 days a year equals 73,000 barrels. 73,000 barrels at 42 gallons is 3,066,000 gallons per year possible. But that doesn't mean that they have to spread it over a year. If they think they can inject that in 3 months, that's how long they'll do it. They'll take 3 months to do it. Newer injection wells are being permitted for anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 barrels a day. During 2011, there was 12 million barrels of brine injected into wells in Ohio. 53% came from places other than Ohio. We still question that, and I think it was a lot higher. The D&L injection well in Youngstown that caused the earthquakes injected 550,000 barrels during 2011. 94% of that waste, excuse me, came from out of state. That's it.
I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers. And now we have a chance for anyone who would like to ask them some questions. I've got a couple initial questions up here already, but if you would like to continue asking questions, just raise your hand and someone will come around and pick them up.
Oh, okay.
And I guess any or all of you who would like to respond can do it. The first question is, how many injection wells are there in Washington County?
I believe it's 9, and there are 2 more proposed. And we can pass the sheet.
Would you say 9 or 90?
9,
9?
yeah.
Are any near the Newport, Reno area? Because that actually was the epicenter of the tremors we had, what was that, last year?
Yeah.
2 point something.
I really hate this because I came here thinking that I was going to have information for you, and I don't. I'm still trying to get the ODNR to release that information. I will send what I have to COFIG, and they can make that available. But the 2 that are proposed are in Newport Township.
Okay.
And one of my concerns with that is in one of the public records requests that I did, I wasn't intending to look at the file, but they were supposed to have all of the annual brining reports pulled for me. And when I got there, they said, oops, there's been a mistake. They accidentally all got filed. Which one do you want to look at? And I said, I want what I asked for. I want to see everyone in the state of Ohio for last year. And they said, we'll have to pull every chart. And I was like, let's get started. So I ended up looking at files I wasn't going to look at because of that mistake. And one of them was an injection well that was either in Washington or Noble County, where there was a letter that came to the Department of Natural Resources from the operator of the well, who was requesting to increase the amount of pressure that they could inject into that well, because they were at a critical need to be able to inject more waste, and the only way they could do it was by increasing the pressure. And so they sent in, two samples, and there was a little yellow sticky note in the file from the lab questioning the samples. Tom Tomostik approved the increase of the injection pressure, and a short time later that well blew out, and they had to rebuild it. And so it's not just that the waste has changed, it's the sheer volume of it.
By the way, they do have an earthquake monitoring thing here at Marietta College and someplace else. There are two of them they just established. And they did some seismic testing over on Muskingum Drive, and I put that down as a question. And I have no idea whether it's related. They claim they're looking for Marcellus Shale. I sort of suspect they might be just checking out the earthquake faults for the injection.
Where was this?
I could be wrong about that.
Where was this, sir?
Dylan can tell you, I think. It was in all
We
the
can
papers.
ask for those records. If this
Yeah,
was
they came out on Muskingum Drive, which was, why that was a good location, I don't know. Which is, by the way, near where our water wells are. They set up 4 or 5 big trucks with these big saucer gizmos on the bottom of them, and they shook the area so hard that they maybe busted some pipes down to the courthouse and shook some dishes off people's shelves in the surrounding area. And it was seismic testing, but I have no idea what the background is. It's a company from
Can I interrupt
Texas.
you right here for a minute? I have a question or comment. The seismic testing was done for a company called VibroSeis. It's being done on all the state routes in Ohio. The permit was approved by the Ohio Department of Transportation. I had a mini earthquake at my house, had no idea that they were even coming through town. They lied to both the county engineer and the city engineer in order to get permits to do this. And they are collecting information so they can make 2- and 3-dimensional maps for oil and gas companies, which they can sell those maps for a lot of money. I'm sure they didn't pay the state of Ohio a dime to do this. When I called ODNR, which is right out on Muskingum Drive, they denied that they had any knowledge of it at all. It took 5 phone calls. Actually, I had to look at the permit and get the name of the person from the Ohio Department of Transportation who signed the permit. She was located on Muskingum Drive. When I called her directly, got her number out of the directory online, called her, she admitted that she signed the permit, and she said the decision was made far above her. When I tried to get information about who had signed that permit, just a stone wall. The Ohio Department of Transportation did not want to share any information with me at all. So, and again, we have jurisdiction in the city over them coming through the city, but we had no idea that those trucks were going to produce that kind of vibration. And now at my house, the entire house shakes every time a truck goes by. So, you know, they've done a lot of vibrational damage to the homes in Marietta.
I want to give you all a number. If you have a piece of paper, write this down. 149.43 of the Ohio Revised Code. That is the public records law. Use it. Use it often.
Could you repeat that?
It's section 149.43 of the ORC, Ohio
Revised.
Thank you. Ohio Revised Code. It's state law.
And the place where you would send that request to get that information is minerals at,
Not if it's the Department of Transportation. It has
Oh,
to go
if
to
it's
the
in the
Department of
DNR.
Transportation. No. Any state agency, you use that, and you use it often, and you tell them that you know about 149.43. It is your right. And I just wanted to address the one thing that the gentleman said on the earthquakes. I took the latitude and longitude locations of the current injection wells right after the